Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Join hosts Dan Melnick and Qasim Masood as they explore big ideas, limitless possibilities, and engage with visionaries, entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who dare to dream big, get inspired, motivated, and find practical tips for personal growth. Think big, dream bigger, and ignite your potential.
Welcome to Think Big with Dan and Qasim. Our guest today is Jeff Gibson. So Jeff, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us where you live and what you do.
Yeah, I'm Jeff Gibson. I'm the founder of My PEO Pros. We're a full-service PEO and medical benefits broker out of San Antonio, Texas, but service the entire U.S. I have clients in a lot of different states, not every state, but a lot of states. It's a little bit about who I am.
Awesome. So I was curious about your background. Like, how did you kind of get into the PEO space in the first place?
Yeah, so in my 20s, I was a business owner myself, had employees, had no idea that there was resources to help such as PEO out there, manage employees. Ran my business for about almost a decade, lots of HR problems, this, that, and the other. Found my way into PEO, visiting with someone I knew at ADP at the time. And they said, have you ever heard of this PEO thing? I'd already sold my business and was kind of looking for that next opportunity. Kind of read a little bit about it and thought, this is a lot of the problems solved for that I would have needed when I owned my business. On the HR side, payroll, make payroll a breeze, benefits at a discount, workers' comp insurance that just kind of works in the background. It made a lot of sense for me when I saw that, and worked for about a decade in one corporation or another, learning more about PEO and what it was, and then got the entrepreneurial bug and went back out on my own so I can help companies, love small businesses, and help them find the right fit in this type of industry.
So what was your previous company that you did before jumping into this endeavor?
Yeah, so for a long time, I was with SWBC, a big corporation here in out of San Antonio. Really, they service Texas, and they do it great. And what I learned was they do a great job and they have a real niche with certain clients, while other groups that I've encountered over the years and such do better with different types of clients. Some like things that are like high risk, like roofers and construction. And some of these groups like, more tech-centric companies that are looking to streamline processes like tech companies, medical offices, things like that. So it was really a chance to find the right fit.
Well, yeah, I was also curious about like what was your business before that you got into, because you were saying that you're like an entrepreneur, like a different business.
Yeah, whole different industry. My degree is in exercise, so kinesiology technically, to use the technical term. But yeah, I owned a gym right out of college, through pretty much most of my 20s, sold it right around the time I turned 30 and went corporate for my 30s. And now I'm in my 40s back in that entrepreneurial mode. But yeah, it was a gym. I had about 15 employees, did a lot of strength conditioning for local high schools and things like that.
That's awesome.
In the Oklahoma area. It was a blast. It was a lot of fun. It's a young man's job, takes a lot of energy. And as I started having kids, I just needed to use some of that kind of energy toward them.
No, for sure. Yeah, that makes total sense. I'm curious, in the PEO space, right? Because you work with a lot of small businesses, and I think many people, for some people, it's sort of like a foreign concept, right? They don't understand PEO, what it means. So if you can kind of just explain for our audience, what PEO means and why somebody who has a small business should look into that as an option.
Yeah, of course. I always use examples of larger companies and small businesses and how they compete against each other. Whether you want to compete or not, you are for either talent or something on some level. A lot of large companies, you take a 3,000 employee company anywhere in the U.S., they're going to have internal teams for payroll. They're going to have an internal team for HR. They're going to have an internal team that just essentially does their employee benefits. And they'll have teams of these people. Depending on what they do, they may also even have risk and safety personnel right there on staff or a full team of them. What PEO does is it gives small and medium-sized businesses that opportunity to outsource those functions to an expert level person. Most small, medium-sized businesses can't go out and hire $1,000 professional payroll employee, $100-something thousand depending on your market, HR employee, risk and safety services, the whole thing. And in reality, they don't even need that stuff full time. They need it to stay compliant, to stay competitive with their larger rivals and such, but they don't need it full time. So this provides that all of those functions to small, medium sized business owners on an outsourced basis, completely get them compliant. And caveat, it comes with a big bonus on reduced medical benefits. That's a lot of people explore PEO for medical benefit purposes. They always stay for compliance because they're like, you guys just make my job so easy. But a lot of people, they really understand PEO from that medical benefits thing. So that's a big driver. And then the third piece is that workers' comp. So as I mentioned earlier with riskier groups, I mean, workers' comp, the things that PEOs can do for groups that may have that exposure, help them gain contracts through mod rate, things that a PEO can do that you can't do on your own. It really just, it's a fit for a lot of people to streamline a lot of those back office functions, save time and save money. Many times it accomplishes all of them.
For sure. And I think also that there are some misconceptions about PEOs as well in terms of like how much it could cost, whether it is actually saving money and whether they think it's a good fit for their business. So you were saying, I mean, obviously you guys kind of work with lots of different verticals, makes total sense. But what about in terms of other criteria, right? If there's, certain company size, you were saying, I guess, for you guys, pretty much any state, but are there other things that you look for? So, okay, they must have this many employees, or if they have like more than this amount, it doesn't make sense. Like, what do you kind of look for from that standpoint?
Right. The general answer that I see is going to be when you get to about 5 or 10 employees, it starts kind of maybe making sense there. Definitely if you have medical benefits that you're purchasing at that point. Not all businesses, they're not required to provide medical benefits until you're 50 employees, but a lot of companies just feel that need to do that to be competitive, to attract and retain employees. So once we see they get to that range where they're starting to add things like the medical benefits and such, it really starts to make sense to at least kind of kick the tires and see what the numbers shake out like for your company. Because at the end of the day, it could be a drastic savings overall on your medical benefits alone that pays for all these other services that you never knew were going to make your life so much easier.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. But I guess like in terms of, I'm sure that there are companies that are too big, right? Where it's like, okay, like at that point, it doesn't make sense. So, like, so in your mind, what is that number? So, okay, it's like you have, thousands of employees or whatever. Does it make sense?
Right. Yeah. On the top end side, it really it's a little different on the top end side because industry by industry, we see property management companies, they'll use a PEO up to 10,000 employees. That's not common for most businesses. Most businesses, once they're 500 to 1,000 employees, generally the PEO model doesn't make sense for them anymore. And sometimes even smaller than that. What we see is it really makes sense up until they get to the point where they can do things like their own self-insured medical policy and they can actually absorb that risk. Their own self-insured workers' comp policy, they can absorb that risk. The need for full-time staff in these situations is often what puts it out of necessity for the larger businesses as well. Like I said, those 3,000 employee companies, they have a team of payroll, a team of HR. So once the small company reaches that point, they become that entity essentially.
For sure, yeah.
It's not a viable service.
Yeah. And I guess in terms of your business, right, because you were saying you have clients all over the US, which is awesome. So how have you kind of gone about growing that business or like on this channel? Because do you travel to events? Do you do more like outreach on social media? Like what has been like the best way for you to kind of grow this channel and expand your client network nationwide?
Yeah, so nationwide, it's kind of interesting how that's come about because essentially I would say, and I can pull the numbers, 85% of my business has come from a referral of some sort. So while I have business all over the U.S., I essentially have what I call channel partners all across the U.S., people that know they're similar to me in what they work with in some business facet or another, whether they be an insurance broker or a CPA or whatever. I essentially have connections like this all over the country, and I utilize those. So I've had clients in New York, or have clients in New York, Oklahoma, California, Florida. I can name those off the top of my head.
And Texas, I'm assuming as well.
Most of my business is in Texas, real centered heavily around San Antonio, and it gets a little lighter in Austin, a little lighter in Houston, and in Dallas I have a pretty decent presence, and then Oklahoma, I'm native to that state, so have some old acquaintances and such from there that all in the network.
For sure. And it is interesting, right? Because I think it's like sort of what you mentioned earlier, right? Because part of it is, the value and the cost savings, but it seems to me that cost savings are just part of it, right? Because you can definitely bring more value when it comes to other options, especially, as you said, right? Some of your clients or folks in your network that are in these risky businesses where they can offer more protection and more support if something, God forbid, does happen to one of their employees while on the job.
Right, exactly.
Awesome. So in terms of your goals, right? Because right now we're just starting Q2 here in 2025. So what are some of your biggest goals and objectives for the rest of this year?
Yeah, so some of my goals and objectives this year, it's really just growth right now. I was fortunate to start this business with what kind of 1 foot already in the industry and a client base to start with. So this year, it's really an exploration of growth and scaling. What that looks like, we'll see. Ideally, I'd like to bring on 20 clients remaining this year, but I'm implementing some other things, some marketing stuff that I'm kind of excited about this point and could scale even faster. So overall, my goal is just constant growth. I've always been a guy, even when I had a quota at corporations, I've never set like the goal to be a low bar. And I really never look at the goal like this is where I want to get. I kind of always have that as my floor. I know I'm going to get here, but how much more can I grow? And that's really the focus this year, going into a lot of things that we're doing with marketing and outreach and bringing on a lot of channel partners this year I've brought on. So that helps that growth, and it really helps that growth, as I was mentioning, outside of the Texas area. Been doing a lot of driving around Texas, going to network events, things like that as well. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And in terms of networking events, like how have you found that? I mean, has that been pretty helpful for you to go to? Or are there certain events that you go to more? I mean, it seems to me like Austin might have a bit more in some aspects in San Antonio, but what does that look like for you when it does come to going to events or even conferences, things like that?
Yeah, no, I think the biggest thing, this is something that I learned early on going to Chamber of Commerce functions, was be where your audience is. I learned that my audience really isn't at most Chamber of Commerce functions. It's not the business owners. It's not that who attends. It's really large corporations sending employees, and they're really not decision makers for what I do. So I really explored other network opportunities. I've been a member of a few things over the years. I've been a sponsor for Vistage and EO. I'm also a part of a Provisors group that I think is a really good group. They require a certain amount of tenure and experience before they'll let you in, and it's really B2B focused. So I think at the end of the day, it's really just finding where your audience is. I've done BNI and things like that in the past. Those tend to not, again, be my target audience. So again, be where other business owners are. That's really the biggest thing, that I can say. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, just be around the people you service.
Yeah, that's good advice. And I guess in terms of advice, right, if you could go back in time, right, you've been an entrepreneur before, you're an entrepreneur, it's like your second go around. If you could kind of go back in time to before you got started, let's just say before even like your first business, what would you say is the one biggest piece of advice that you wish you knew?
The one biggest piece of advice is that things are going to move forward. Time only moves in one way. Keep trying to figure things out as you go, and never assume you have anything figured out beforehand, because as soon as you think that, you don't. You're going to realize real quick you don't know what you don't know. And, I think that's the biggest advice. I guess to say it shorter, always be open-minded with where you're going and what you're doing.
That's good advice. If somebody watching this wanted to reach out, see if they wanted to learn more about PEO or just, interested in working with you, do you mind sharing your website, social media? I guess best ways to get in contact?
Yeah. Best ways to get in contact are on my website, mypeopros.com. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm on all the others, but as part of the marketing campaign that I was mentioning, those are getting revamped right now. So LinkedIn and the website is definitely my best channels as of right now. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to get a hold of.
So Jeff Gibson, and then it's mypeopros.com.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Well, Jeff,
Yeah,
I want to say thank you so much for your time today.
of course. No, I appreciate it, Dan. This was great.
Awesome.